back to her voice after what can only be described as a quite unacceptable leave of absence. But in my defence, it's been quite a busy couple of months. But to make up for it, I'm not going to focus on just one woman today, but a whole collection of women that were involved in one particular operation in the Second World War. Now, ever since the 75th anniversary of D-Day, back at the beginning of June, wasn't it? I've been really focused on learning more about women's contribution to the Second World War. Now, I focused quite a lot on the home front, women that were involved in the ATS, in the Land Army and as Wrens, and for that I'd really recommend this book, The Girls Who Went to War, because it's focused on 3 women in particular and just really builds the empathy with those particular women, so I'd really recommend that. But then I was listening to an episode of The Guilty Feminist, and remarkably there was a man on it, which doesn't happen very often, and he'd written a book about the Special Operations Executive, or the SOE. And it's the women that are involved in that I'm going to focus on today, the secret agents that were behind enemy lines in World War II. Now, this book is called Lonely Courage, and I'd really recommend reading it. It's by Rick Stroud, and it's this book that has inspired my video today. Now, the Special Operations Executive were behind enemy lines. They were obviously allies, and they were behind enemy lines in occupied countries like France. And their aim was to build up resistance networks and to transmit information about German activities back to Britain, to try and build up information that the Allies needed in order to win the war. Now, women weren't always involved in this. It's actually thanks to a man called Selwyn Jepson that they were allowed to. He approached Winston Churchill, obviously the Prime Minister at the time, and said that women have more capacity for a cold and lonely courage than men do, and that made them more, I suppose, capable of this kind of work. Now, in a rare flash of, I suppose, sort of pseudo-feminism, Churchill agreed that women should be allowed to take up these positions, and so many women got involved and performed incredible feats of bravery and resilience. Now, I'm going to focus on one of these women today, and mention a couple of others as well, and her name was Noor Inayat Khan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She's my favourite, I think, because she's the most unlikely secret agent you could probably imagine. She was descended from Indian royalty. She was raised in Paris. She studied child psychology at the Sorbonne, and before becoming a successful children's author, she was described as shy and sweet and had incredible empathy. She had to move over to Britain once the Nazis occupied France in 1940, and it was then that she became involved in war work. And then in 1942, she was enrolled in the Special Operations Executive. Now, I said she was an unexpected agent. Her training was a little bit of a mixed bag, let's say. She hated physical exercise, so I can really relate to her when it comes to that. But not only that, she had a pathological fear of lying that she'd inherited from her father, which perhaps isn't the best trait to have in a secret agent, but there you are. She was the best at Morse code in her class, however, despite not being particularly discreet and accidentally revealing information to undercover officers during practices and that sort of thing. But she got through, and she was sent over to France in 1943. She landed in Paris in June, and she spent an entire summer, despite some of the people she went over with being captured, transmitting from all across France. She had a couple of close calls. She was not particularly adept at disguises. Her idea of disguise was dyeing her hair bright red and bright blonde and wearing dark glasses, and as an Indian woman in Paris anyway, she drew quite a lot of attention. She almost gave herself away on quite a few occasions, forgetting code words and transmitting messages from her wireless in apartment blocks that were filled with German officers. She took quite a lot of risks, but she was incredibly brave. She was given away by a Frenchwoman in the October of that year, and she spent just under a year in solitary confinement, in chains, often being stripped naked and humiliated and beaten, but she never gave away anything. She was incredibly brave and incredibly resilient. She was then taken to Dachau concentration camp and shot in September in 1944. So she went through an awful lot, but also what she demonstrated so much to me, and I already knew this, but it's really hammered it home, is that femininity and courage can go hand in hand. They're not mutually exclusive. Like, masculinity and femininity is a spectrum, and courage, strength and resilience, whilst in the past have been associated with a more masculine personality, can actually be anywhere. You can be feminine and brave. It is possible to be both. Another example of one of these women is a lady called Nancy Wake. I almost said Nazi. Nancy Wake. And she once travelled 310 miles in 72 hours on bicycle in her role as a courier. And another woman called Virginia Hall, she hiked and cycled and all the activities you needed to do as an SOE agent with a false leg, which she called Cuthbert. So she was a pretty incredible person as well. But like I say, if you want to learn more about these women, then just read Lonely Courage. I couldn't put it down for weeks. It's the most incredible book. And these women, frankly, deserve to be household names. So join me next time. Thanks.